Hi, Michelle. Welcome to the Zoom. I'm kicking off the stream as well. Let me make sure my settings are good. All right, I think we're good. All right. Okay, this is going to be the live stream for the arm anatomy drawing, and I'm drawing an arm that is not in your reference list. So there's that. If you click on arm references, you'll see several options, and then you'll see some slightly more challenging options down below. Some explanation about that. I want to give you plenty of references to work from. But don't feel like the challenging ones are going to net you a better grade or anything like that. They're for people who feel like they've got a handle on just the basic poses and the basic anatomy, can challenge themselves with a little bit more difficulty in those other references. Last week it had to do with twisting and stuff. This week it has to do with just less definition in the models. So maybe there's two arms in slightly stranger poses. There's a female model, notoriously difficult to see what the muscles would be doing. You have to use your reference and your imagination a lot more for those ones. So that's for people who want the challenge, but it's not required and it's not going to give you extra points or anything like that to do it that way. Good morning, Kayla. Just a couple of notes about last week's torso anatomy drawings. There were several that came in that were shaded as if the skin was still on. It was just kind of like the muscly model with the skin still on. Really, that's not what we want to do on these anatomy studies. We're peeling that skin off and showing the model as they would be with no skin. So for example, I have my anatomy model here I'm going to pull out. This is what we're talking about with these studies. Is we're digging into the specifics of the muscles and bones and landmarks and stuff, showing how they flow, how they relate to each other. It's not just a muscly model well rendered. So hopefully that makes sense for the arm. Anyone who did that in the last week, this week make sure that you're showing where the individual muscles flow, where they overlap. I'm going to pull this back out again. These relationships are really important, like the fact that this muscle, triceps, dives underneath deltoideus. That's an important thing to know because it gives you overlap information. You make better decisions about your drawing. And I know I harp on that every single time, but we're interested in how these things flow, where this muscle flows out from underneath that muscle. And so a good reference is really going to be your best friend here because it's hard to memorize all of that stuff. All right, and I don't expect you to. All I expect is good observation, careful work, incorporating the measuring and the proportions and the drawing stuff that we've covered thus far, and then good use of your reference. And your reference should be more, I would say, more than just the handout that you got from me. Whether it's a book, as I said before, I've got like 6 books, an anatomical model. I've got all kinds of stuff because the more variety of reference you have, particularly if you have 3-dimensional reference, I have a computer program that I do the lectures on that's fully 3D, the better you wrap your head around these muscle and bone shapes and how things interact. So just know that going forward. Don't worry about drawing all of the body here. So like this part of my drawing, I'm going to just leave it how it is. So I did this as kind of a straight line block in with a little bit of curvilinear contours and kind of left it there. I'm really just going to focus anatomically on like here down the arm, and this is just going to support the arm so I don't have a floating arm. All right, kind of makes the drawing maybe a little more interesting. All right, feel free to holler questions if you have them. I'm just going to be talking and drawing as I do. Hopefully you're used to that. Zoom people, that's you, Michelle. If you have a question, don't let me answer it without repeating it, because if I just answer your question, no one on YouTube has heard it, so it might be strange to just hear me start talking about something without repeating your question. I'm going to try to remember to do that, but I get caught up drawing and my brain short circuits. All right, so here's my arm drawing. As I said, I worked through the contours, measuring, that kind of stuff. Proportionally, I think there's still a little bit of work that could be done up here in the shoulder, but for better or worse, we're going to carry forward with it. Right now, at this stage, this is where you should have your drawings when you start your anatomy work. Really feel good about the drawing before you start laying anatomy on top of it. Because if you start putting anatomy on top of a drawing you don't feel good about, the anatomy is not going to feel great either. All right, what I'm going to do first is find bony landmarks. And down the arm, there's not a ton of them, but there are some things I want to piece together and figure out what's going on in this arm. Get this out of the way. Bone-wise, so I can route the muscles accordingly. It's always easier for me to figure out what the bones are doing because the muscles anchor to them and flow around them, and the bones don't move. I mean, they don't change shape or present differently. They're solid structural things that you can count on them. So I'm going to start at the top and just move down, and the first thing I'm looking for is the acromion, and that's this dimple right here. This is trapezius popping down. This is deltoideus coming up, and they don't pass each other. There is a bone, there's a set of bones sort of right here. It's this clavicle comes up and has an end there, and then around the back, that triangle muscle of the scapula has a wing that comes forward, and they meet here and join here in this sort of flat bony spot. The model can get as muscly as they want. They'll always have this bony spot right here on the shoulder because there's just no muscle there. Muscle, it's not going to grow so big that it overlaps unless you're doing some Incredible Hulk type thing. All right, from here, I'm going to put the scapula in just because I see it on this model, and there's going to be kind of an interesting little thing happening in it. Even though it's way up tucked in the corner here, I'm still going to get it. And it seems to, that comes in a little bit. It seems to have like a bit of S curve to it off the page there. And that wing, that S is kind of a hallmark of the clavicle. It's like, here's the end of the clavicle. Here's like the sternal notch. And it tends to go swoop, swoop like that. In this view, it has kind of a nice flow to it. All right, that's pretty much it for the top there. There's just one bone that comes all the way down here. The humerus sits underneath this, and you don't really see any of it. It bumps the shoulder out a little bit, but you don't see much of it till you get down here. There are three things that I'm looking for at the elbow, bone-wise. One is the medial epicondyle, and that's, let me grab my anatomical model here. The medial epicondyle is here. It's this funny bone area of the arm. So that's this bit. You can see it kind of jutting out there. You can feel it on yourself. It's a really kind of bony bump. Oh, I can't get you to see it very well. Boom. So that's one thing, medial epicondyle. I'm looking for the olecranon, which is that sharp, when you bend your elbow, this sharp point here, that's olecranon. So it's usually relatively easy to see, really important thing to get. Does anybody else have an audio issues? Let me check. So I just checked the playback and I was getting audio. So in the comments on YouTube, if anybody's having audio issues, let me know. Michelle on Zoom, are you having any audio issues? Oh, all right. Okay, thank you. Headphones issue, good. All right. So the third thing I'm looking for in the elbow is the lateral epicondyle, which is, you don't see it as a bone too much in a straight-ish arm like this, but you do when it's bent. there's like a bony bump here. So my olecranon's out here. I have another bony bump right there. That's my lateral epicondyle. And when I straighten my arm, it kind of goes into this divot. And here's a straight arm. It's like buried right up in that divot there. So it's like a three-piece situation. Medial epicondyle, olecranon, lateral epicondyle. If the arm is straight, it's probably going to be inside of a divot here. If the arm is bent, that divot will poke out and become sort of a bony situation. So for this pose, what do I see? Well, I already got it in the contour here, and I can see it in my reference. There's that glow on the side. That is a muscle. It's this muscle, this brachioradialis. The glow I'm seeing is this side bit of that muscle. Right behind that is where that lateral epicondyle is. So I'm just going to circle that in. It's like right here. Lateral epicondyle. The olecranon is that little bump, that little tiny bump there that I got, and I can see in the image. That is the olecranon. So the arm is turned sideways a little bit. Things are going into perspective a little bit. And then where would this model's funny bone be? Way on the back side of the arm. Like if I were to hazard a guess, maybe somewhere around there. So I don't see it I don't really see it through the model, so I don't need it this time. Those two will do. So I have a acromion clavicle. I've got my lateral epicondyle, my olecranon. So now down at the wrist, there's only really two things at the wrist bone-wise that I'm looking for. The major one for me is this. I use this all the time. That's the head of the ulna. You can see it on my arm here. That bump, always look for that bump. It's like the bridge into the wrist and hand. It's really nice to get it as like a lead into the hand. All right. And then that's the ulna. It's that thin bone. It's relatively straight. And then we have the radius, which starts up here. By the time it gets down here, it's kind of a wide bone that's angled slightly like that. And that's about all I'm going to do, is just put an angle. It's like the shape of the bottom part of that bone. And that's going to be enough for me. All right, and then hand, I'm not too worried. I blocked it in so that it was, relatively descriptive, but I'm going to kind of leave it. I'm not going to go full anatomical detail on hand. We're mainly worried about the gross anatomy of the arm. And by gross anatomy, I mean major, like big anatomy, the stuff you can see. All right, because I'm working in Vine, I can just give that a little hit and it kind of goes away a little bit. I call it ghosting, but I ghosted it away. All right, I'm going to keep working Vine because I want to find my muscle shapes, and then I'll go in with my pencil and get more specific. It's what I did in the drawing. So I gestured in Vine and kind of moved things around in Vine. And then I ghosted and came back with my charcoal pencil to get these contours a little more sensitively. All right, and I like to start just up at the top. I'm going to start with deltoideus because it's pretty straightforward, and then we'll move from there. And there's a few things about it to know and to look at. The first thing, and this is something that really helps you when dealing with muscles generally, is where do they start and where do they end? And what shape are they? What do they connect to is going to be really helpful. That way, if you get this muscle in a way that you're not used to seeing it, like the arm is twisted up weird, you still know, okay, I have to piece apart what I'm seeing. I know that it starts around the top here. It's like the Lego hand is what I call it. Right? It starts here and it wraps around the back like this, and then it flows down to this outer part of the arm. And lucky for us, this guy is ripped, so we can see almost where it comes and attaches to the arm here. If I follow this back line up, it almost points directly to it. It's almost like if I just continue, if I ignore the arm, there's this kind of a continuity line, right? In the figure. I don't know if you can see that, but that's a nice thing to be able to do. Like, oh, I notice the back comes up, and if I ignore the arm, it just kind of swoops and carries back up to that. That's going to help the design of your figure to get those kind of alignments. I'm not going to use the whole thing, but it does lead me right to where this muscle inserts, which is right there. Sort of middle outside of the arm. Okay, and where does it originate? So this is the insertion. That's where the muscle attaches away from the trunk of the body, I guess. Where does it originate? It originates on the front sort of third of this clavicle here. And you can see it in the model. If you look on the reference, you'll see that this shoulder muscle kind of has three components, three bulbs, so to speak. The first one kind of, let's see, it's like a teardrop shape like this. And I'll finesse and refine this shape later, but there's some things to point out. So there's a front piece like this, and you can see the dark spot here and a shiny spot there, and you can even see this back little bit there. Then there's another bulb, the top of which isn't quite all the way back. It's like this. And it's the one that kind of comes down and attaches to this point mainly. And then there's like a third one that almost, it's like right, you can see this little glow that's right here where I'm putting a dark line. There's kind of a glow, and you see this kind of overlap in the reference. I don't know if you see that in white or, in light on the back of that deltoideus muscle, but that's what the light situation is doing, which tells me this rolls and then this rolls again. So there's a third one that goes this way, and then it's the one that goes behind. So when you see this from straight on, you might see, like if you were looking side on to a shoulder. In fact, let's grab our model again. You have, this looks like chaos in the shoulder, and this anatomical model is pretty, highly detailed. But if we look at the top, we can kind of see 1, 2, 3. That's the thing to remember about the shoulders. You have like a 1, this is the back of the arm. You have one sort of lobe or mass going this way. Then you have this center mass right there. And then you have this front mass right there. That'll help you make short work of a shoulder. All right, and then we're into Pectoralis Major, which we talked about last week, which goes, if we look at no, we don't see it on this model. Yeah, we probably do. It comes along and attaches, and it actually wraps up underneath this deltoideus muscle. The deltoideus muscle overlaps the Pectoralis Major, which overlaps this biceps muscle we're going to talk about here in a second. So that's nice to get. I'm actually going to describe that a little bit. I'm not going to flesh this muscle out, but I am going to describe that overlap a little bit. And there's a gap. So this little indent that you see on the model, there's actually a gap there in actual human anatomy. This hole right there is it's a space between where the shoulder muscle, that deltoideus muscle, stops and this pectoralis muscle begins. And often we will see that as some kind of shadow or you'll see that divot in models all over the place. Even not really built models will have some kind of that indication that there's an indent. If you look at my small screen down below, an indent sort of right here, right there on that model. And I might just describe that. Just for fun. That's going to seem a little more anatomical. All right, so I feel reasonable about the shoulder as far as shape is concerned. I can come back and get more specific with it here in a bit. I need to figure out what the arm is up to. And the thing with the arm that I need to do is just think there's three major components of the upper arm here. One is biceps brachii, or the biceps muscle. 2 is brachialis, which sits underneath it. And then 3 is triceps, which is the big, usually the bulk of the arm, like 2/3 of the arm. So I'm using this model to death today. So here's this biceps brachii. We could see brachialis, this middle one. Those both go towards the front. And then we see triceps, this big one in the back. So I'm going to try and figure out what I'm looking for. And me personally, I like to start with triceps because it's big and I can get a lock on sort of where it goes, right? I'm looking for something that has a flat strap of tendon. So there's this flat strap of tendon, and then it bulges inwards, but it doesn't cross that middle line really. It ducks back behind the deltoideus. And then the whole rest of the back of the arm is just more tricep. It's just adding, the details of that particular muscle. So do I see that in this model? Yeah, there's the olecranon. I know that's where this muscle has to end. And I'm looking for something that bulges out from underneath this. And it's just going to take an S curve more or less back to that olecranon. So what do I see? I see some light back here, and that's what I'm using to figure out what's going on, because the light is telling me what the form is doing. Those little hits of light are like, hey, something turns here and there. So I'm trying to get a hold of that here. So there's a little bump there and a tube. It's this little part of the muscle there. It almost resembles a tube in the actual model. Here's the actual arm I'm looking at without the shoulder muscle. So there's like a tube here that runs all the way down and points right to the olecranon. So that's what I'm looking for, olecranon tube. And then his muscles kind of, because of the situation with subcutaneous fat, which is fat that's just underneath the skin, the brachialis, which this model, and I've noticed in all the photos of this model, it's a big one. He's got a rather big brachialis muscle. And that's common for bodybuilders as well. You'll see them when they do their flexing or whatever. This brachialis is actually a lot bigger than in a normal person. So I have to imagine where that brachialis is going to start and where the tricep ends. And I'm just going to, design-wise, I'm just going to say it does that. Just so I get that nice S curve. Tube, there's a flat strap of tendon that bulges. So I'm going to satisfy myself with that for triceps. I'm seeing this tube go up into this main body and then wrap around the back. All right, what's going on here? I know that biceps brachii and brachialis, there's like a vertical division between them somewhere, and they both wrap around the front. So what do I see? Pretty much from about here, there's a vertical line that runs. If I just carry this front of the forearm straight up, it's that same idea of continuity that I had before when I went through the arm here. If I take this and just keep going, I kind of run into that vertical line. And there's a reason for that. It's because there's of this muscle here, but just from observing, I see this relationship. Now I just have to find one other line. Where is the line that divides biceps brachii from brachialis? And I see that it starts right about here and goes, it's just about vertical. Yeah, it's like that. It's like a triangle. It's this triangle down here. And then it kind of disappears into triceps, and there's a little fat situation there. I'm going to say this is good enough for me. And then I can almost see the split that happens in the biceps brachii. You don't have to really, I say biceps brachii because you have a biceps in your leg too, even though in the handout, I just call this biceps. There's a split that happens up here at the top. And the reason it's called biceps is there's two heads, 1, 2. Interestingly, triceps is because there's 3 heads. That's just like places that the muscle attach. I can almost, in this model that I'm looking at on the screen, see the split. So I'm just going to hint at it, but I'm not going to go crazy with it. All right, I feel reasonable about that for the upper arm. The nice thing about this split, so you can see, it's kind of like a braid or something. And that's always something to think about when you're dealing with anatomy, is this shoulder muscle starts wide and it comes in and dives down thin. And then from either side, you have these things that split. And then from inside that, you have another thing that comes out and splits. There's a lot of flow that happens. And the more of that flow you can get, man, the better things are going to feel, rather than just having like individual islands of muscle, I guess. Having them overlap and interact is going to feel a lot better. Okay, now the forearm has a lot of stuff going in it, this lower part of the arm. And we've separated it into essentially 3 groups for our anatomical purposes, just so that you know there's muscles galore here. And you can dig in and get down to each individual muscle. There's a bunch. But they kind of operate in 3 distinct groupings. And so we're just going to deal with them as 3 distinct groupings for our drawing purposes. One is going to be the flexor group, which is this. It's the group on the inside, sort of funny bone side. And it takes up the whole front part of your forearm. And it does this sort of flexing thing. Right? These tighten up. You can probably feel it in your own arm. If I poke, it's kind of loose. And if I squeeze a fist in, this stuff all gets hard. Right? That's these muscles contracting to pull my arm in. That's the flexor group on this side. Opposite that, there's the extensor group, which comes all the way up the back side of the arm to this lateral epicondyle. See if I can. It's this grouping here. It runs down the front of the arm. So flexor group is all of these muscles here going on the inside of the arm. Extensor group is all of this flowing on the back side of the arm, then extends things. And then the divider between those is brachioradialis. There's a couple of muscles there, but we're calling it all brachioradialis. And it's just this kind of this wrapping group of muscles that starts up in this pocket that we made and ends down here at the thumb. They kind of wrap around and point right to the thumb. All right, so armed with that knowledge, I'm going to go in this pose. I see brachioradialis really strong, so I'm going to go for that. I think this contour is a little bit too low. Right? Like as I'm looking at this now, it's like it actually feels better to have that up a little higher. So I think I'll correct that now as I'm putting the muscle in, just to give it a little better shape. All right, so I'm looking for a muscle that comes down and points towards the thumb, and luckily in this guy I can see it. It just literally it's like that. And there's actually 2 of them, so I'll add just a little bit of sense of that, but that's good enough for right now. All right, so now I'm looking for, do I see flexors in this pose? Well, the truth is I kind of do. This little tiny bump right there, and this is important to get, it's just a little indicator. There's a tiny little overlap happening right here. Like that. That's part of the flexor group on the other side of that bicep muscle that we're just seeing a little peek of it. But it's a nice little interaction right here at the elbow to give us some depth. And remember those overlaps, the depth that you get, your eyes can cue into that kind of thing really immediately and really effectively. So take advantage of it when you're drawing. If you see an overlap where one mass is kind of moving in front of the other, be on the lookout for it. When you see it, take advantage of it. All right, now I'm looking for muscles that go down the front of the arm, and I can just see them. They're coming out, they're poking out from behind here. And there's sort of a vertical nature to these, and you can be a little creative about the design of them if you want. It's kind of just this strip of vertical muscles that go down the front of the wrist. Is there anything else I see? Yeah, there's some stuff right here in the back. And one of them is a tiny muscle. I think I mentioned it in the video. Even though we don't cover it, I don't think it's on your handout. I don't have the handout right in front of me. It used to be on the handout, but then I kind of removed it because it seemed like maybe it was part of the extensor group, but there's this little tiny triangular muscle here, and we would just ignore it except for that you see it all over the place. So it kind of branches this branches this way, it branches the other way. So, and this little bump that we see on this model is that muscle. It's called anconeus. It's just this little round or little triangle shaped muscle off the back here. And it gives you a split out from which comes another flow of muscles. So that's why it's important to get. We even might see just a tad of the flexor group peeking on this side as well. So the flexor group is a really big, wide, it takes up this whole part of the arm. And with an arm in this pose, we might see a tad bit of it here. We might see just a tad bit of it there, peeking off both sides. And then this is straight bone. So that's the head of the ulna. The muscles route past it this way and past it on the front, past it on the back, and it just kind of pokes out from between them. So I'm going to get that. And then, as I said, I'm leaving the hand alone. All right, so that gives me reasonable muscle situation in vine charcoal. Now I'm actually going to come back through with my charcoal pencil. So I've ghosted this back to my contour line drawing. But you can see with vine, the nice thing about vine is, it's not going to go completely away. It just falls backwards. So all the mess I just made just becomes supporting, supporting fog, right? So I'm going to use that now. I still have record of everything that I decided. I've got my reference here, which I'm using a three-dimensional anatomical model. I'm just going to use this guy. They sell like 12-inch desktop versions of this, but they're pricey. I think they're like $100 or something. I'm going to use this one. It's going to show me sort of the fiber orientations. This is a medically accurate artistic drawing or artistic sculpture in resin of the figure. So it's a really great reference. Anatomytools.com. Andrew Cowers, I think is how you say his name. Fantastic anatomical sculptor. All right, Deltoidus. I don't want to be super generic here because it's really easy just to make an egg shape and it gets a little boring. So I'm going to look for reasons to make this bottom edge a little bit irregular and sort of make the contour here a little less basic. I'm going to start up here because there is that divot. I see a divot right here. It's like the top shelf of that shoulder. And I can imagine it, if I look at the reference, I can imagine, I'm not looking at the edge of the figure, I'm looking just down from that. There's this pocket, and I can almost just reach up there with my finger and go poke and just kind of stick my finger in that pocket. Anytime that happens, anytime you have a face that goes from facing you and it rolls to being like that, that's a good place to put a contour line. So I'm going to put that first, even though it may get lost in the anatomical shuffle, so to speak. And I'm going to be a little more specific about this edge. And then I'm going to take advantage of this lobe separation thing. So I'm going to really highlight that there's two different lobes here. This isn't going to go straight shot all the way down the back to the point here. There's going to be overlap there. And we see that in light up there in the model, but I'm describing it with line here because that's how I'm describing the anatomy here is contour lines for the muscles. Right, we're going to go down like so. All right, what happens in this one? The center lobe comes further down. So I'm actually going to amend this line I made for this frontal lobe and maybe S-curve it just a little bit. So this has something to peek out from underneath like that. That's going a long way towards making this feel, right? Making it feel more anatomical. If I were to just go whoomp, whoomp and call it good, that's just not going to be, I'm like, oh yeah, there's 3 lobes, right? That's not going to be as descriptive as having this little overlap, that little overlap. That stuff's going to feel, it's going to feel better. It already feels better. Again, I'm not going to get too wrapped up in Pectoralis Major, but I do want there to be some indication that there's interaction happening there. And I do want this pocket though. I'm going to get that pocket just because, you know, I like it. A little bit of bottom part of the bone. So I'm just duplicating this little empty pocket right here. And I can even maybe give that just a little bit of shading. I tend to go overboard with the deep shading. You know, it's like it doesn't take much, and maybe that's not entirely necessary, but that'll offset that muscle a little bit. All right, what next? I'm going to work tricep again just because it's big. It's not taking up the bulk of the arm as I see it here. It's kind of maybe half and half, maybe even a little less, but it's so descriptive. Every time I lean over, I'm just rotating my anatomical model to make sure I'm being as descriptive as I need to be and getting the overlaps and stuff correct. This pokes out from underneath triceps. All right, it's now or never on this part. I think I'm gonna go with it. Tucks just out from underneath deltoideus. And do I like my S-curve? I think I'm gonna make it just a little S-ier. It went flat there. I just kind of raised it up a little bit just to make it feel a little more, I don't know, anatomical, I guess. All right, there's a flat strap of tendon. This is the major shape for that muscle, but there's a little bit of overlappy stuff happening down here, these light shapes that I see. So I'm just going to use those to help me describe this. I know there's a little tubule, so I'm going to add that. And then that tube kind of opens up into the muscle as it goes up. If we look at this again, in fact, the other arm is even better. It's like tubule here opens up into bigger muscle. And I think this hand I have is almost dead on what he's doing. It's a little more bent. So I can use this as like, okay, there's that tube and it goes up and there's a little overlap and some flatness there. All right, I have that mental picture. At this stage, if I want, I'll probably go back in and be a little more specific with fibers, but also if I want, I can play that game of what would the cross contours be doing? Cross contours, you'll remember they're just lines that go across the form, like if you're wrapping around it. So you can see that kind of gives it a little more specific roundness. All right, brachialis and biceps brachii, what are you doing? Brachialis sits underneath biceps brachii. So I think what I'm going to do is do biceps first and then sort of just fill in the muscle flow of whatever shape I'm left with. Right, if I look at my anatomical model, they're about even splits. If I look at the model up there, the shapes are just a little more interesting. So I'm going to go with what I see here. He's got that big vein that comes down as well. I'm just leaving that out. I'm not worrying about that. The border between those muscles is actually behind that vein. There's like it goes from being a thin tendon to a big muscle here. So I think I might just exaggerate this a little bit or maybe take it to where it should be because I felt like I made his arm maybe just a little bit thinner than it should be. So right now I'm going to thicken it up a bit just so I can get this little bulge right there a little more. All right, so I'm kind of just left, that leaves me with this brachialis muscle. And right now it just looks like a gap, to me at least. It almost looks like muscle, and just empty space. I'm going to add some fibers to make sure that looks like muscle. And I'm going to hold off because I want to make sure that the orientation of those fibers is correct rather than random. Right now I'm going to work on brachioradialis. I'm just kind of being fast and loose here with the contours, right? Giving some sense of just like fiber drop off there. Nothing super specific. I'm thinking mainly of that big shape. There's one set of muscles I didn't put on this, but I think I want to, because this is just looking a little bare down here. And if you look on this model, and I point this out in the video as well, there's these little muscles of the thumb that kind of wrap up and tuck underneath those extensor muscles. I wonder if I can get you to see mine. It's like this, there's like a little swoop there. The best way to see it. That little bump right there is actually You can see them flexing. That's muscles of the thumb. And it adds a nice little split down here in an area that might otherwise be kind of boring. So I can I'm going to get my vine to map this out. I can route this forward a little bit like that. And I'm just thinking curves right now. I'm thinking like what S curves would look nice. So I'm going to call that my flexor group. And that leaves me room here for this sort of double bump of the thumb muscles. And that's kind of overstating it, but that gives me my map on what I'm doing there. And that'll just make that wrist feel just a little bit better, I think. In this position, his aren't going to be very bulgy because he's holding a fist, but like you can kind of see mine right there. It's because the rest of my arm's not very muscly. Those thumb muscles are more obvious on my arm. Bone peeking out. It's that anconeus muscle. And maybe a little bit of flexors. All right, major muscle shapes. I feel pretty decent about that. Now I'm going to get some fiber orientations. I kind of quite like what the shoulder is doing. Like I'm glad that I did this overlap stuff. It just feels more organic. Even though it's maybe I use the reference as example for that, but maybe as a little bit, I don't know what, creative interpretation of what's going on. But I'm going to add just a little bit more idea of what the fibers are doing here. If you really want to dig deep, there's actually a different type of muscle. So these are kind of straight muscles. And then you get this interlacing kind of muscle here, back to straight muscles on the front. So this center head of the deltoideus is a little bit chaotic sometimes. You get this sort of overlapping, interleaving situation. You can decide to what extent you want to play that or to what extent you want it to just be like a third, those three lobes. If you're going for real anatomical clarity, getting those interleavings is kind of a nice touch. But if you're going for straight design, like if you're exaggerating the muscles on a figure or something like that, you don't need to go too crazy there. Right? That's probably enough, and that might actually even be taking it a little overboard. I could do that in the light as well. All right, tricep orientation. The fibers are going to flow sort of towards, they kind of flow pretty much where the muscle flows. It's like this. I'm just going to play it cool here a little bit. more than I already have. Personally, I don't want to get too overly caught up in the fibers, especially if I'm coming back through with white. All right, biceps brachii, those fibers are oriented right along the muscle like this. So just put those in like that. It connects up high and down low and contracts this way. Brachialis, they kind of spiral. If I look at this, and this is what I'm taking my cues from. If I look at this, they kind of wrap. They don't go straight up and down. They're kind of diagonal, which is nice because it's going to be a good offset between these straight ones that go, these ones that go this way, these ones that go straight, then we're going to have a layer that goes kind of like this. Bring back that bicep just a little bit down there at the overlap. At this point, I'm just kind of playing. It's like a textural game as of now. And it's where having a good reference is really helpful because the orientations of the muscles do a lot, or the orientations of the fibers of the muscle do a lot to describe what we're seeing. But there's some of the tricky things to just, know inherently. So it's good to just be able to refer to it instead. The vertical nature of these flexors is what I'm trying to get, just something that flows straight up the arm there. And pokes out from behind that brachioradialis. Again, this is one of those things, if you really want to get specific, you can get specific with, like, there's extensor digiti minimi, there's extensor carpi radialis, extensor carpi ulnaris. There's a bunch of different muscles here. For my purposes, I'm just showing, hey, in this flexor group, there's a bunch of muscles. I am in danger of losing the separation of the groups here, so I'm just going to come back and be a little more specific about. Anywhere it looks like a group might be getting lost, I'm going to re-separate them with just a slightly stronger line, I think. All right, I'm going to call that muscles, and then it's always the thing that I don't have time for, the end. But I'm going to throw just a little bit of light on this one just so we can see. I'm on gray paper, and it's easy. I tend to forget as I'm putting stuff together that I still have half of my work I can do into the light side, which is nice. And I could use the reference if I want for sort of lighting help or an idea on what to do with the light. Like I notice in this biceps, it's more the light is concentrated up here more than down here. And that goes for top of the tricep as well. And that brachialis. But I'm probably not going to go full shadow on this side because I want the anatomy to be clear. I don't want to load that too much with charcoal. Things got a little foggy down here. If I want, I can come back with my eraser and just be a little more, or just do some cleanup on that edge. It'll give me a better silhouette. Again, this is just sort of like after the anatomy considerations. You can also do this work with a white charcoal or white Conte, sort of back glow this thing, which will really make the silhouette strong. In fact, maybe I'll do that a little bit. We've got about 4 minutes left. I'm going to come back in. I am going to use this highlight as kind of a inspiration, and knowing full well that I don't have the time to truly flesh this out. But you can see how it's coming. Just that little bit of pencil work. Really start to make things pop. I'm just using some of my dark lines to add light lines just next to them, like above and around, to give it just a little more ripple, I guess. Sort of deviating. I'm trying to highlight the form here rather than trying to shade like we would if we were doing a full render, of course. Kind of just mimicking this top down, top down. It's like lighter at the top and gets a little darker. Lighter gets darker, lighter gets darker. Lighter at the top. So I'm concentrating my white stick towards the top of the muscle. It's going to help it interact with the muscle behind it as well. Kind of separates the two a little better, maybe. Maybe I'll fill this bone in entirely. All right, let me pop the silhouette of this with the white stick real quick. going to be a little heavier handed here, but it's just because it's background. I don't have to worry about form as much with it. I'm just kind of highlighting that muscle and then, or like, you know, white stick on the silhouette to kind of describe that silhouette and then growing that line outwards. And I'm going to let that drop off down at the hand. I'm using like a cheap gray paper pad. It's not as nice as the Canson paper or the Strathmore paper, depending on what you got. It's like it is Strathmore, but it's like the budget gray paper pad. So it doesn't take the charcoal quite as nicely. So anyway, it's subtle, maybe unnecessary, but it does give that arm just a little bit extra pop as well. I'm going to call it there. It is 11:02. So hopefully that helped you with your anatomy drawing this week. Remember this, if you didn't last week, do it this week. We're skinning that model. Like, what is each individual muscle up to? Right, take the time you need. Yeah. I've drawn a gazillion of these things too, so don't hang the universe on your shoulders, but do a proper job of it. Do as thorough and clear a job as you can. If something doesn't quite make sense, or you're like, I can't imagine what is happening there, sometimes the answer is just spending a little more time with your reference, finding a better reference or one that's closer to what you're looking at or something like that to piece together what's happening. And then some of it is invention, creative invention of what should be happening rather than what you exactly see. Right? At the end of the day, I'm going to close this picture and you're not going to see it again. You're just going to see this and you're going to go, it looks good to me. Right? I'm sure some medical students would have something to say about some of the stuff, but the overall masses, the flow of the muscles, the design of the thing, that's what we're really shooting for here. And again, this isn't all of your drawings don't start this way. They don't all go this way. But this is how you solidify your understanding of what you're looking at so that when you're not drawing like this, it's still running as a subroutine in your drawing process. And your efficiency just goes up, up, up. If you're trying to describe something, accurately, anatomically, convincingly, you know what to exaggerate. If I wanted to make an arm just look disgustingly big, like Incredible Hulk style, how do you do that? You just make everything bigger? Well, when you know what's here, you can kind of selectively grow things and maintain anatomical believability. You can make it thinner. Anyway. All right, so that's going to do it for anatomy, folks. Next week, it's going to be leg, so we're going to work our way. It's going to be torso, arm, leg, and then after that, I don't want to predict too far into the future. I think we're going to start moving into hands and feet. You'll have a project based on that. Heads, you'll have a project based on that, and then it's pretty much the final at that point. So, all right, that's it for Anatomy Man. Let's turn that off. Shifting gears, beginning drawing folks. It's my Art 7 crew. Let me shut my reference here. We are dealing with fabric. Those gear shifts always feel so unnatural to me. I'm like, and that's it for anatomy. Bye. On to striped fabric. So I've got the reference that I'm using here, and I'm actually not using the whole thing. I just picked, I thought this corner looked interesting. It's the top left corner. And so that's what I'm gonna be working with. And I drew the fabric edge in. There's a tension point up in here. So you can see these folds are kind of flowing up in towards this point. It's not a perfect point though, so they're loosely flowing back in, but you see this fabric edge here wraps around and down like that. And then these edges, if you remember the pipe folds from the curtains we did, where it's like you have that irregular edge and then everything flows back to the point. In a real life situation like this, here is your irregular edge and there is your flow back to that point. And then there's a piece that's lopped over, so it's kind of hanging, though the folds and stuff for this are also, like the rolls, are also oriented towards that point. So it's like second half of a diaper fold, right? We have a sort of a gentle U here, and then it gets more drastic as it goes down. It's interrupted by a fold. So there's quite a lot happening here. It's kind of nice. I like it. I am working today in purple new pastel, and I haven't chosen my light stick yet. I could just go with white new pastel, but I think what I'll do is this. It's a cream color. It just looks like white, but it's actually a cream. It's like off-white in the warm, sort of yellowish direction. So those are the two that I'm going to be using, and I'm holding off on this white, I'm going to call it white cream, for quite a while. The thing you want to make sure, and I want to point this out as clearly as possible now, is that your dark stick is significantly darker than your paper, and your light stick is significantly lighter than your paper. If your light stick is lighter than your dark stick, but darker than your paper, it's going to make things really wonky. And you could still draw that way. It's just going to invert and be confusing to you as you're drawing it, and visually confusing. It almost would look like a Photoshop filter or something. It can mess with your values. So be careful. For now, for what we're doing, a good, nice dark, and I could see how I drew on the page, it went down nice and dark, and then a nice light that's significantly lighter than the page. And I guess you can't see from the screen, but here, if I make a mark, I can see it shows up light, right? All right, so this is sort of where we're at now. I drew this ahead of time so I wouldn't spend time drawing the contours like we did last week, like the fabric itself. But I do need to think about the stripes. So I want to add stripes to this. And stripes are very much something that I would add after drawing the forms of the fabric itself. And I think I actually do have a little more work to do in these forms. So I apologize, you'll have to bear with me. And I'm probably not going to be able to do all of this in the time allotted, but I think what I'll do is I'll lay all my stripes in, and then I'll maybe flesh out this area right here because it's kind of the area I thought was interesting anyway. So it's going to be my focal point where I tell the viewer, hey, this is where you should be looking. There's a fold down here I missed. There's some cool stuff happening there, so I want to get it. Okay, stripes. One thing before I get started in stripes, I just want to note is that my stripe situation is strange because there's a dark side and a light side to these stripes, which makes the design kind of interesting. It's part of why I liked this is because it did more of that front, back. So when I go to do the dark stripes, I need to remember out here on one side, the dark stripes are lighter, and on the other side, they're darker, right? Should be easy to remember because I can see it very clearly. One thing I do want to point out, I made a couple of decisions about the fabric that I didn't like in the reference, so I changed. One of them was this right here. If you look at the image that I'm drawing from, this fold for this part of the fabric right here, if I just keep going, it perfectly lines up with the fold that's down below, this fold here. It's almost just like a perfect lineup. And that's fine, but that's a tangent. Whenever in your drawing, in a photo, we just accept it. We're like, we're so convinced by the reality of what we see that it doesn't tend to bug us, though it still can. In a drawing, it's really tough because drawings are by their very nature a set of decisions someone made, right? So the random chance of things lining up perfectly, that happens in the real world, but if you're saying, I decided where everything went here, it just visually seems to attract us. Boom, if this lined up perfectly, perfect line here with a little ding there, it would be a moment of weirdness. And so to avoid that, I just went, you know what? I don't like you coming right out there, so I'm just gonna tuck you back a little bit. No consequences for that whatsoever. It's just gonna alleviate that weirdness. And that's something, especially with fabric, that you can do as artists. You have the power, right? You can make it what you want. All right, I'm stalling because I'm trying to figure out where do I want to start putting stripes in. And I think I'm going to do it right here because I just have two. I have a dark stripe that wraps up like this, and then the back side of that same dark stripe that goes down. So I'm going to start it here. And I'm looking at this to try and be as careful as I can. My dark stripe has to obey what the fabric edge is doing as well. So fabric edge wraps up like this, stripe is going to wrap up like that. There's a stripe here that's actually the back of the same stripe as well. I want to make sure both of these roll downwards so they roll into that contour edge. If I just go straight, like if I just go stripe, straight, it's going to, instead of feeling round right there, it's going to go flat and it's going to seem flat the rest of the time. So wherever I have the edge of a stripe, I need to pay careful attention to make sure that I've got it rolling the correct way. Very few places will you see the stripe go T perfectly to the edge of the fabric, right? Even up here where it's at the edge of the fabric, there's still a little swoop going on, right? You don't want too many of these perfect intersections, perfectly perpendicular intersections, and everything just goes flat, 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 flat everywhere. These stripes are your opportunity to describe the edge of the fabric, or describe the form of the fabric, I should say, the flow of things. Here's the fabric edge. That's one place I can get away with it. This edge here is kind of a nice S curve. It starts going down like this. Like that. And you can see I'm offset here a little bit, like this stripe actually comes halfway through that stripe. But I made them roughly the same size. Maybe I could stretch it out a little bit. These are going to go dark, so I can grow this. And grow that. When I fill this in, that will disappear. Right, and I don't see any other stripe right there, so let's do this one. The bottom of the stripe on this side, it's the same stripe as this side, so if I get rid of the edge of the fabric and imagine the stripe instead, it does about the same thing. Right? It's this edge that comes along and down and down. And now I opt not to strengthen this part of that line because that's in fact a piece of white fabric. Or it's a white part of this piece of fabric, I guess I should say. Same goes for this. I have to kind of imagine here. You can kind of see how I led from this stripe down into this. That's going to make sure, we'll get rid of that. You don't have to go through erasing all this stuff. The white stick will do it. I'm just showing you how it's going to work transparently here. One thing I know about this fabric is that it is, the stripes are all roughly the same size. So I do have to think about that. I made this part of the fabric wider when I drew it, and it opened up this part a little bit more. So I think I need to add another little sense of a stripe there, which would go up and be hidden underneath this. So that's going to save me there. All right, I'm going to work on the stripes across this top part here. They're interesting because especially this one, it's not a perfect stripe. It like goes wobble, wobble in and out like that. And it's because of the way the fabric's moving. And I'm going to describe the way the fabric's moving like that by getting this stripe correct. So it's kind of like that. And then goes like that. That's the shape of that. And you can have stripes that do that. That's fine. Let the example be your guide. The reference you're using, I should say. This is a very straight line here on this stripe. I don't want that. It'd be fine if you did it, but for my purposes here, I don't want it to be perfectly straight like that. So I'm going to add, it's going to be subtle, but I'm going to add a little bit of contour here, a little bit of S curve. That's just going to keep things flowing, right? I don't want to cut something with a perfectly straight line if I don't have to, unless it's a contour of the fabric. It rolls like that. That's what that one looks like. And then by the time we get down here, it's just a little shape. So far, so good. I'm going to get these down here just because they're relatively straightforward. This isn't going to be the place I'm focusing either, so So I'm not going to be overly concerned. I want them to be accurate, but I'm mainly just supporting the other stuff that's happening here. All right, what else do we have here? More or less vertical stripe there. There's some interesting stuff happening here. This is kind of a confusing little pocket, and I kind of like that. So I'm gonna, where I was kind of like, yeah, this is good for here. I'm actually gonna slow down and make sure I get this pocket. Because it's interesting, it's gonna help my drawing to be interesting. So it drops down, zig like that, zags over and comes out from underneath in this bump fashion, wraps down like that. That's another point where the stripe wraps. So I don't want a T right there, and if I look at the reference, it doesn't. It curves into that spot. I definitely want to get that. It's dark stripe all the way up in. Then it cuts out from here. Make sure I'm a reasonable distance away from this other stripe. If you start getting confused about your stripes, by the way, you can start filling them in lightly. It's not going to hurt anything. In fact, it can help you keep track of which is dark, which is light. Yours, of course, is going to look different than mine. So this has a little waviness to it, and it dives down towards this pocket, like so. And then over here, I want to get this right. If I just go wavy, willy-nilly here, I'm going to lose the sense that there's a fold coming through here. So I need to look at where this bulge is, go straight over. It's still straight right there. This bulge, that little bulge right there, represents a ripple in the fabric, right? And it just grows as it comes down. So I should expect a bigger bulge down here. And I do see that like that. It's almost like this. If I project a cone, sort of that fold going through, that's what I'm trying to pick up on right now. All right, that dark, there's a dark shadow, and I made it just a little bit too big here. Yeah, 24. I'll wrap this up a little bit so I can start getting to describing these folds with value. It gets thin here. You just get to be privy to me talking myself through this whole drawing. Gets thin through there, like that, and opens back up down here, about the same width, I would say. And does a very similar thing. Let's see, I got this. So width. I'm trying to make stripes that are right next to each other about similar width because this fabric is doing that. Always keep a lookout on your drawing for, that rolls under, for stripes that are getting out of hand. Right? Do you have any stripes that are getting so much wider than the rest of the stripes around it that it's starting to not be believable? You kind of have to keep track of that. There's a little room for deviation here. Like, you can be as specific as you want, but there's a little room for, just eyeballing, I guess. But if you're not paying attention, you're not keeping track, you'll have stripes that are really thin in one spot, and then they'll just start to get huge inexplicably, And it's because you kind of got tunnel vision as you went. I'm starting to do that a little bit here. If I were overly concerned, I'd go back and fix that. Right now, it's not egregious yet. So I'm going to live with it for now. Hope that's not modeling poor behavior. You're like, mine's not egregious either, so I'm just going to live with it. Well, make sure they're not egregious. There's a wrap there. That's down. And this is part of the fabric I'm not going to focus too heavily on, so I need to remember that. Although there is a cool little moment happening right there, like where the fabric kind of stacks in onto itself. But I have to decide, is it worth it? All right, just the last few. So this one wraps this way. By the time I get over here, it's almost wrapping the other way. There's like a fold, that's why. So the fabric, there's this little crease right here. The fabric's going that way, sort of away from me. And then it hits this crease and kind of starts going the other direction. So that gives me the freedom to wrap this the other direction, right? Like one curves this way, one curves that way. Just subtly. About an equal distance up here. And this just goes on repeat. So I kind of like how they don't match up. It's like the border between stripes is here in the middle of a stripe, here in the middle of a stripe. So I'm going to try my best to keep that up. All right, that feels pretty good. So I'm going to start rendering this. And the rule for the rendering on this one is you're just darkening the things that are behind and letting the things that are in front be a little bit lighter. So that's the reason the lighting in your reference is so kind of blah, because I really don't want a whole bunch of light shadow necessarily. Instead, we're thinking about the three-dimensional form of the fabric and how to flow these stripes around. That being said, I am going to go in, or like with that in mind, I guess I should say, I'm going to go in and fill in all my dark stripes so I can get a better picture of where I'm at. You can see I'm being just a little bit messy with this stick. And by a little bit, I mean a little bit. You don't want to carry on being too messy for too long. Yet at some point you need to clean things up. We will get to that point. That's dark. This might be as far as these lower ones get. You can see how quick this is. Oh, I just made one of the classic mistakes. So, dark stripe, white stripe, dark stripe. So this should be white. I should have another dark stripe here. So I missed a stripe in this section. Right? This can happen to you if you're not careful. And even though it's part of the drawing I'm not going to be too worried about, I'm still gonna fix that. All right, this is going to be white. White stripe. Dark stripe's going to be a little bit thinner at the top. Bulge out and cut sideways. There we go, a little bit better. Striped fabric is like that, man. You can, especially if you're moving relatively quickly, like I'm doing here, it's easy to miss stuff. But you saw it's not that, this is not going to pose a problem. It already is starting to look like white. It's going to still look like white by the end. So don't be thrown if you have little mistakes like that. I haven't drawn so dark yet that I can't take things back. You always want to be able to take stuff back. All right, it's at this stage that I'm going to do an optional thing that I like to do. You may not like to do it, and that's just give this thing a smear. And I'm actually going to use a paper towel. Any paper towel will work. I'm going to use one of these blue shop towels. I could use my hand, but I've got charcoal from the previous class and stuff on it. So I'm just going to use this and give it a smear, which is going to spread the values around in a smooth way. You don't have to do that. You can just keep building on this, but it's a rather quick and effective way to, I guess, integrate the drawing into itself, I guess. And it sets me up to make good use of my eraser, my white stick, because now I have I've got middle gray and a fog on the page. Now I can lift out of the light side of things and add white stick there, and I've already got a little value in the dark side of things. It's just, I find this to be a better working spot. I wouldn't leave it here, and I wouldn't overdo the smearing. It's really just like a one-time, that's all I needed. Now I can really dig in. I'm going to deal with some dark stripes first. And the aim here is to get rid of lines. And by that I mean there's like a strong line right there. If I just grow that line upwards, and the same with this one up here, grow that line downwards. There's less of a focus on the line here now and more of a focus on the border. I need to be a little more careful up here because this is the light side of things. If I want to, I can bring a blending stump or finger into it if I want to smooth this out. You can see it kind of just knocks the paper texture back a little bit. Not absolutely necessary, but it can be nice to do it. The key is you don't want to do it everywhere. You're going to need some hard edges eventually. So if you keep smearing and keep smearing and keep smearing, you end up with something that seems really blah, like indistinct, not clear at all. If I find that some of these lines are too dark in the light side of the fabric, I can just come back with my kneaded eraser and just pop it a few times. And then restate that. And it can help lighten things up a little bit. I'm going to do some of my darkest stuff right now because it's like right here, right through here, here, and up in here is some of the darkest stuff I have. So I'm going to do that right now, and I'm just following the rule, I guess, that the darkest stuff goes behind, like the stuff going behind is the darkest stuff. Now my violet, my purple will only go so dark. If you have a black stick, it'll go full dark. I could add black to this, but I'm probably not going to do that because if I do it in one spot, I'm going to have to do it everywhere. So I'm going to let that be full dark. And then if I squint, I see that this stripe is a little bit lighter out here. So I'm just going to let it be dark. I'm just going to let it be dark close to where it goes behind that fabric and lighten up as it comes away from that fabric. I'm going to darken this stripe a little bit as it goes behind the fabric, but not full dark. Just as it goes behind this piece. Same with this one. Even though I invented it, it gets the same treatment. So as I do this stage of the drawing, I'm really just thinking like, where is stuff going behind other stuff in the darks? And anywhere that's happening, so like this stripe goes behind that. I'm just darkening this stripe. And this is a front side stripe, so it's darker. Again, this area of the drawing, I'm not going to have it be a focal point, so I'm just going to let it kind of drop off. Again here. This is going to help this feel more like white, that mistake I made. When I darken the stuff that's around it, it starts to feel less like a dark stripe and start feeling just like a variation in the white stripe, right? Let's go here. This is going to be full dark. And I don't know if it shows up on the screen. I'll try and get this closer. Because essentially what we have here is a stripe that's tucked way back in. So it needs to be darker than this one as it goes behind. So I'm going to let this one be light right here because it's closer. And this one is behind, so it's going to get the full treatment. No paper texture, just dark as I can make it. Probably for that whole stripe. It's subtle right now. When I come back with the white stick, it's going to really start to be obvious. Right? The white stripes are going to do a lot of work too. Full dark again here. Apologize if my head gets in the way. That's just what my head does. On these dark stripes too, like these ones that are behind stuff, like this one for instance, it's better to go too dark than not dark enough. Because when I start doing stuff in the white, it's going to show even better what's happening. Very dark through here. The truth is, for these, as long as you deal with the white stripes effectively, you can almost make these these dark stripes, just straight, full dark. All right, my borders here are a little bit fuzzy, but I'll clean those up because I still need to add a little bit of new pastel there. All right, and for the sake of time, because I want to move on to the light stuff, and this sort of happens to me every time, I'm going to move on. Even though I would probably spend, if I were you, I would continue this, the whole rest of, I'd do my whole drawing with this idea. All right, I'd go through and carefully do the whole drawing this way. All right, let's see. So for better or worse, I'm going to say that's good for those stripes. I'm going to add a little bit where it looks like it needs it. I'm going to add just a little bit of this Conte stick in the white stripes too. Particularly through here in this pocket. If that's stuff that's behind this. This is closer to me, that's behind. This is behind that. So same principle I was using before. I'm not going to worry about that. Don't let me get hung up on it. It's just a little bit of variation here. Just want to get that in, that little shift to dark as well, because it gives me this fold a little better. Right now I'm preparing for the white stick, so I'm erasing, and you can see it's bringing back some of that feel of the white stripe. But when I start putting the white in, it'll really start to take on some dimension. You want to make sure you're ready for your white stripes, though, also, by the way. You don't want to be doing a whole lot of smearing once you start adding white, because you can really make a muddy mess of things if you do that, especially with these new pastels. They will gladly just mix right together and make this mud, just this really grungy mud feeling value, and you don't want that. So I'm looking for slightly darker spots in the light stripes here, and I'm letting the gray paper be that. All right, let's move to the white. Oh yeah, we got about 10 minutes. So things are starting to get dimensional here. Again, I'm not shading like I normally would. I'm just sort of following the rule of it's darker here as it goes underneath, lightens up. That's darker as it goes behind. So now I'm thinking in reverse with the white stick, what's jumping out? And particularly based on the reference, what looks lighter? What do I want to have jump out? This little section here really is. So I'm going to add some stick there. And I'm going to use this opportunity to clean this edge up too. And it's going to darken as it goes this way. You may find as you do this that the new pastel is way smoother than the Conte. You can barely see that. It doesn't appear to be making a whole lot of difference in the camera. I think you can tell, but here at home, man, it's drastic. It's drastic enough that those first few marks can be kind of scary. Like, what have I done? I'm just keeping this edge basic, but this, I could add some of those frills to this edge, but I'm certainly going to wait. I'm probably going to wait on that, I guess is what I'm saying. So I'm just looking for that variation in the white stripes. Where is it? Where does it appear to be lightening up a little bit? That seems pretty dark. This has some white variation in that edge, which is kind of nice. Like little triangles of light. I'm letting this sort of pop off of that little shadowy spot that's going behind it. There's a nice kind of light spot on that roll up there. So it like lightens up here and lightens up there, and it's kind of somewhere in between, and there's a little bit of light right in the middle too. That's going to help things feel fabric-y, that little shift, shift, shift. And I might be exaggerating it there, but I'm okay for now doing that. Now we're starting to get some value here. And this is why your dark stripes can almost be just full dark everywhere, because a lot of this fabric volume is going to come out of this dealing with these light side, dealing with the white stick. If you weren't using the white stick, then you'd need to be a lot more careful about how you were laying in the dark information, because that's all you have. I do want to get the top of this because it's sort of, I'm telling you, hey, the light is above here. So I'd continue to flesh these out more too, had I the time. Don't want to overplay this too much. It's going to start feeling like it's shiny, because this stuff actually isn't. If I look at this, it's not as light in value as this stuff over here. So I don't want it to get that light in value. The issue with the dark stick with New Pastel is it's so, or the light stick rather with New Pastel, it's so soft that you can really struggle to pull it back up effectively. So you see me kneading this eraser into a fresh side, scrubbing up just a tad, kneading it again, scrubbing up more. I felt like this area was starting to get too much attention. I really wanted us to stay over here. Okay, and now I'm like, what do I want to do as far as the edge of the fabric? I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup here. I have that initial fog from where I smeared. I can come back in with an eraser and really tighten that up. And also, if I see it, I'm not sure how much on your reference there is, but I could add some cast shadow on the wall. The issue with this cast shadow is that there's not a single light source. So it's kind of diffuse, hard to get a grip on cast shadow, but it can give you a decent sense. It can give you a decent sense of that fabric. Okay, I think I'm going to call it there. So hopefully that gives you a reasonable idea of where you can take this. Things to note, you beginning folks, is that you don't have to draw the whole reference. And it says that in instructions and it says it in the video, but make sure you don't try to draw that whole section. Really pour your time and attention into a part of it that you can really dig into. This is like an hour and 20 minutes. For me, I expect you to spend triple that on yours. Go slow and carefully. On the previous one, there were a few that looked like they'd been done far too hastily, far too quickly, with far too little focus and attention. So do what you need to do, put on a podcast. I can't listen to podcasts when I'm trying to focus on drawing. They're too distracting, but some good ambient music will do, and just spend the time on these. You really want to be considering this and thinking about this as you're drawing it. You want it to have your sole focus. It shouldn't be like this is due at midnight and it's already 10, take a picture and send it off. You really aren't learning if you do that. So anyway, watch the video of the instructional video on this. Hopefully this live stream helped. Really think about the three-dimensional, when you're doing these stripes, really try and flex your imagination into imagining, if I were to walk along this, what would that trip be like? You know, I wouldn't just go, if I were walking on this fabric, I wouldn't just go tur. I'd like go down and around and inside and back up. Like there's this flow that happens three-dimensionally. And that's what we're trying to conceptualize. That's what we're trying to communicate. So if you're not thinking about it, it's going to be real hard to convey it to someone looking at your drawing. All right, I won't rhapsodize on that for very long. As usual, don't hesitate to ask me any questions if you have them in Canvas. And good luck this week. We'll be moving on from fabric next week and into different textural things. And we're going to kind of, having done Conte and New Pastel, we're going to move into sort of a use what you like. Hopefully, I would suggest giving these a chance because they've become some of my favorite materials to draw with. And it just takes some, I don't know what, some flexing into them, some learning to tame their messy qualities. And then they become efficient and helpful rather than something that you're fighting all the time. All right, that's going to do it. I got to go eat some lunch. See ya.